Good morning, everybody. Dobro jutro. It's a pleasure for me to be here in Skopje today. My name is Rochat. I'm an environmental engineer from Switzerland, Geneva. And before starting with my company SOFIES a few years ago, I have worked several years for the Swiss government, who has started one of the first global e-waste programs, which brought me to work several years in India, dealing with electronic waste, but also in many Western African countries, North Africa, Latin America, and so on. So from this experience, we have developed, together with my colleagues, a few suggestions and strategies on how you can shift from a self-organized or informal e-waste recycling system to an efficient and controlled management system. And that will be the topic of my speech today. So during the next 9 minutes I have left, I would like to first quickly go through why do we specifically need to address e-waste. I think Anya has made an introduction that will allow me to go faster through this part. And then go deep into what do we suggest how to start to tackle this problem and what is a suggested way forward. So first of all, just a quick reminder, why do we specifically care about e-waste? Why don't we just consider it as any other type of waste and just hand it over to the municipalities? And I think two main figures that have been mentioned earlier are important. First of all, it's the quantities. E-waste is the fastest growing waste fraction in the planet, and between 2004 and 2008, the quantities have almost doubled, and they have probably doubled again by 2012. The other reason is the content you can find in e-waste, both valuable, you have precious metals like gold, silver, palladium, but also base metals like copper or aluminum or iron. And then you have all the toxic contents, mainly heavy metals or organic compounds like flame retardants or polychlorobiphenyls. So the problem related to e-waste itself, I see it as twofold. The first one is the toxic content. And if you simply throw away e-waste in one of these dump sites, this picture comes from Senegal, but it's unfortunately the kind of site you find all around the planet. And if you look a bit deeper into this, you will find some e-waste, and the heavy metals and so on will slowly diffuse into the environment, into groundwater, and at the end of the day, eventually contaminate the food chain and people. So that's the first reason why this should be controlled or recycled. The second reason e-waste can be a problem is because of the recycling itself, if it is not done properly. And here again, a few pictures speak better than 1,000 words. These are pictures we took in India, where this lady has burned in open air some wires and electric board components to recover copper. This picture is somebody scrapping off the plastic part to recover the copper, and if you look at the background you see a blue liquid. This is sulfuric acid in which the components are dipped, and this is then thrown away in the sewage. Here you have some improper manual dismantling involving child labor to recover the metallic components, or open incineration of cables in China. And we can even go deeper into toxic environmental impacts. These are the chemical processes observed in India and China to recover gold from the printed boards. So the orange fume is nitric acid. You can see somebody handling mercury with bare hands. And the whole operation allows to recover a bit of gold. So I think the environmental and health impact is quite evident with these photos. But what is not so evident is that how inefficient these processes are and how much value you lose. On this chart, I'd just like you to focus on the red parts. So if you have printed boards, the electronics, containing 6 grams of gold, 6,1 grams of gold, the kind of practices shown in these pictures will only allow to recover 1.5 grams of gold. So you're losing most of it in the different rejects during dismantling and improper chemical processes. So you're actually losing value. And these figures come from studies we made into the informal sector in India. And we did the same analysis with the formal sector in India, people doing the same practices, but they are trained engineers and they do it with gloves and masks and so on. But the process itself is inefficient and they do not have a better yield. Only about 25% of the gold is recovered. And here I'm only talking of gold. This Mendeleev's periodic table should bring everybody back to school at the chemistry class, and every red dot you see is an element you can find on a mobile phone. And when you see that improper practices only allows to recover 25% of gold, imagine how many resource is actually lost. And this is not just an e-waste issue, it's a global economics issue. And this chart I would like to show, here you have the quantities of a few metals that were necessary in 2006 to build the 1 billion mobile phones and the 230 million computers that were sold that year. So you see that on the first line, for example, we needed 250 tons of silver and 285 tons of silver to build these equipments for 1 year. And this represents 3% of the global production of silver that year. So it's not just a waste issue, it's a global strategic resource management issue. And the point I want to come to here is that we're not only talking about environmental protection or human health protection, we're also talking about closing material cycles that are strategic for the economy. I have to speed up. So where do we start? The first step, of course, is understanding what's going on in the country, and it's conducting a nationwide assessment. And Elena just showed us the results of the assessment Macedonia has conducted recently. So you actually know what's going on. Who are the stakeholders? What are the practices? How does the current legislation apply? And so on. And you will share these results with all stakeholders and then start drafting a plan. One of the results of such a national assessment is to have this big picture of the situation. So here you have a flowchart showing, it's a random example. It doesn't apply to Macedonia or any country. It's just generic. So you see that importers, manufacturers will distribute to consumers. When it's end of life, you have different ways of collection that will bring it to scrap dealers and so on. You have the entire food chain that allows reuse and then recycling and finally final disposal. And here what we did, we put in red on the map where are the priorities. And typically, here we see maybe priority 3 is the open air incineration of cable or wild dumping should be banned. So this is one of the first issues that should be tackled. Or the informal sector itself, the way they work when they do these chemical operations is also a priority that should be tackled. And then the next step after the assessment is to make a plan. And the plan is maybe taking the system as it is today and just changing it a bit as we would like it to. And here we see that there have been a few changes. For example, on the far right, informal dumping and burning has been prohibited. And we see that informal workers have become small recyclers that work together with large recyclers and so on. So that's very nice, but how do we get there? And I think this is where we have developed a 5-point strategy. We need a few intervention mechanisms to shift from the previous situation to this one. First one, of course, is you need the rules of the game. And I think this is where Macedonia is standing today, is drafting a legislation and a policy. What are the objectives we want to meet? And this means that there are a number of players and of situations along the life cycle of e-waste that will need to be regulated and follow certain rules. The next point is to ensure a sustainable business model. If some e-waste recycling can be a very profitable activity, what is certain is that setting up an e-waste management system costs money, and you need to find this money somehow. And the most adapted strategy, was mentioned by Anya, is what we call extended producer responsibility, as encapsulate the price, the costs of setting up this system into the price of the computer and have the producers manage it. Then, of course, you need adapted technology. We have seen that improper recycling not only pollutes the environment, but also conducts to a huge loss of resource. So technology and skills are needed at different steps on how to collect, how to pack, how to dismantle, and what are the best technologies to recover the materials. Fourth pillar in implementing a system is system management somehow. Who will you control according to legislation? How will you distribute the funds for collection and so on? What kind of information do you need to collect? And where do you start controlling your system and where do you leave it free to the market? So these are strategic decisions that need to be defined in the policy and the legislation step. But what I show with a green arrow here is what we call the clean e-waste channel, and is the part that needs to be organized. And finally, last but not least, what is important for all this to work is education and awareness creation. And this applies to the entire system, from the producers to the different diverse government stakeholders, consumers, recyclers, and so on. So this is time for me to come to conclusion, and there are a few messages I want to leave. E-waste is not only an environmental problem, it is also a loss of economic opportunity and of resource preservation. Your attention, and I'll be happy to answer questions.